Hi, I'm Sean Stankiewicz. I'm a local Seattle game designer. I'm a landscape architect by day and a game designer
Let's talk after this, my yard.
by every other sort of waking moment, I'm a game designer. I also work with my partner, Molly Johnson, and a friend from Manitoba, Canada, as part of the Flatout Games board game design collaborative. So we've, as a team, put together the game Point Salad. Point Salad's a very simple card drafting game that plays 2 to 6 players in about 5 minutes per player. It's, dare I use the word, strong filler game, but in terms of game length, it's a perfect kind of filler game to fit in the space between other games. It also has I'd say the sort of main mechanic of the game is that it uses double-sided cards in a unique way that has an ever-changing market. The game is sort of a joke on the term point salad, and that's where the origin of the game design started. And it sort of evolved into this really kind of compelling game design from that. So we are still exploring what the game sort of finally wants to be as its identity, rather sort of a pun sort of titles. We know those are challenging, so it will continue to kind of evolve as we start to think about the theme. But basically, it's a set collection game where you're not only drafting your the items that will get you the completion of sets, but also all of your scoring conditions, and you'll be building an individual tableau of scoring conditions. So yeah, that's the game.
My first question is there's the part in the game where you can either take vegetables or point cards, but also later in the game you can flip your points into vegetables. At what point did that get added into the game, or has that been there from the beginning, and what was that solving?
Great. So that came about. The card economy of the game is essentially that you have sort of one opportunity to gain the card as it is a point card, and if you don't take that opportunity, it sort of flips down and downgrades into a vegetable. So at some point we were playtesting, and someone said, is it? Gee, I wish this was the veggie on the back and not the point card. Obviously, you could. It's very difficult to find a mechanic that would allow you to flip it the other way because the analysis paralysis of figuring out what is on the back. Early on in design, we thought it very vital that we put vegetables on the back of the card onto the front of the card. And so we made that decision in playtesting in that it gave players a little bit more player agency. It created another compelling decision point that players got to have in terms of being able to say, well, I know I need another pepper and I'm not getting this other point card, so it just add that a little bit. The game used to have actions that we stripped away from the game, saying that does it need this level of ability to kind of trade tableaus or change things? And it was pretty remarkable that when we sort of cut the fat in this game and really just allowed it to be streamlined down to its very essence of just selecting cards, more or less, with the exception of the card flip, that it became stronger. It became faster. The decision points were easier to kind of get through, and that felt like the sweet spot for a game that's kind of designed to be played relatively quickly.
How often do you have like a runaway leader issue where one player wins by a significant margin?
The point totals can be more highly varied than you'd find in a lot of more kind of Euro set collection games. If you have an advanced player that has thought about the strategy and the different ways through it, you'll find that you could have leads of 20 or 30 points. One thing that's pretty compelling about the game is that you never feel like you're out of the game. Even in a very short game, you've got the opportunity to gain point cards that are well suited to your tableau. So you're always building a tableau in terms of efficiency of the cards that you get in there. You're getting point cards, you're getting veggies. There's always that chance that the next point card that comes up is going to be a really strong one for you, but there's always that chance that it won't. So sometimes you have these big breaks where someone could win the game by 20 or 30 points, which is a fair margin. The average scores are between 40 points and 100 points, so it does have a high variability.
So there's a little awkwardness at the end when piles run out and you have to divvy up the other piles. Have you explored other ways to feed the cards in so that they don't have this this weirdness where it runs out and now you have to split another pile?
Yeah, we did try to have a pile that all of the piles are getting fed by. Ultimately, that ended up being significantly more fiddly than just having the simplicity of if a pile runs out, you cut the deck. We also explored the idea that when a pile runs out, that's the end of the game, so you have this different variable game end trigger. That ultimately, because of the variability of which row or which column is being selected from, didn't actually end up working out very well. We tested it quite a few times and just felt like the right solution was to say, moving through all the cards, players have to be very conscious about what the cards they may get sort of stuck with at the end, and that added another layer of player interaction of, if I take this, it sticks you with the tomatoes that you really don't want, and so it added this other level of interaction. So that's where we've sort of landed after testing all the different kind of ways and knowing that that's one of the parts of it that's the least kind of elegant.
Why so many more scoring mechanisms?
I think that one of the exciting selling points of it is that we say we've got 108 cards and there's 108 different ways you can score points. In practice, it's worked very well from a playtesting perspective in terms of you have many, many different options. There really are only about a dozen or so types of scoring cards. They're just equally distributed with all of the veggie types. So the cards are perfectly balanced. The pepper has no value over the tomato, but as soon as the first turn of the game starts, then everything starts to have value. If James takes a tomato on his first turn, that immediately tells me something about the value of tomatoes. James wants tomatoes. James is gonna, if he takes a point card that gives him negative for carrots, that means that, well, James won't want to be taking carrots, so maybe it's advantageous for me to start collecting carrots. So we really like that the game state starts from 0 and it starts to build up, but it can do that in a variety of ways because of the different types of scoring mechanisms that are in it. So I don't know if that really gets at your question or not.
I guess you answered with, we wanted to be able to say we have 108 different ways of scoring.
Sure, and
yeah,
I think that felt like it might be overwhelming, but to be able to tune them so that there aren't any that seem way out of whack. And I guess the follow-up to that is that I don't think that all of our point totals are fully tuned, and we haven't done the type of either simulation or intensive playtesting to find out if this card should be 8 points, if it should be 6, if it should be 7. But that's extremely integral to getting this game to where I think it could really be really strong in terms of being well balanced. And so I think there's still some development room there for sure with all those different types.
Yeah, so I think there is definitely a common mistake among game designers is the concept of making things perfectly balanced by making everything equal.
Right.
Now, in the game we played, Liz was sitting on my left, and she had a card that scored on lettuce and tomatoes. And I took a card that scored on lettuce, tomato, and onion. So I was inadvertently hate drafting her by taking the cards that were helping me. Is there a way to mitigate that? And what other player interaction is there other than potential hate drafting?
Sure. Well, I think that whether you see that as an opportunity for player interaction or kind of a downside is, I think we've had a lot of players feel like that's a really interesting and compelling part of it, is that I start to collect something that you really need, and that's my way of interacting with you. On the flip side of that, I think one thing that we are exploring in terms of within the game space of how we do point scoring is to use some, because you have to be conscious of everyone's tableau around you already, the cognitive load of that exists within the game. So the idea that maybe you have a point card that scores based on what your neighbor is doing is a way to think about increasing player interaction without just adding the sort of hate draft mechanism. The thing about hate drafting in set collection games is oftentimes you need to actually take something that someone else wants that doesn't really help you. Point salad, I think one of the most interesting things that we've really found is strong is that I can just take vegetables from below the point card that you might want, and then that causes it to flip down into the market. So I can get something I need and also stop you from getting something that you need. But then again, the volatility of that market is another thing that at higher player counts means that you do a lot less pre-planning for your next turn, which can be, somewhat of an issue as well.
So you made a decision to make some of the point scoring cards actually have negative points for some of the vegetables. What was the reasoning behind the decision, and how does that change the dynamic of the game?
Yeah, I think it changes it pretty significantly. Like I was saying with the previous example, if someone takes a card that makes it negative for them to take that card, that opens up a new strategic branch for other players to say, I know a little bit more information about what you're gonna do or not do. The other thing was that just having it was an interesting way to balance out getting a lot of points for one type, but by saying that you're increasing your opportunity, there's a higher opportunity cost because you're shrinking the rest of your ability to take other cards. So the decision was made to try to add another layer of I guess complexity to the decision making. If none of the cards hurt anyone, it would immediately mean that I can hate draft the things that I know that you want that aren't going to hurt me.
Well, I'm going to say what I said to the last designer, and I get this game and I like what's going on and I understand it, so I don't have any major complaints. The only question I actually have that is someone else's question from yesterday was, because you're playing with a subset of the point cards, is there a strong opportunity? Is there a chance that it'll be a bad set of point cards? I don't even know what that is, but that was something that someone was concerned about yesterday.
I think that's a big part of wanting to make it feel like all of the cards are quote unquote equal, but they have different opportunities where they're stronger or weaker. The game could be played casually by splitting the deck according to the number of players. You play with approximately 18 cards per player. So if you wanted to play sort of casually, you could cut the deck and just play with whatever random cards are in the half of the deck for your player count. However,
I don't just mean frequency of individual simple card types, but a distribution of point scoring rules that is together bad. And again, that's not really my concept, so I don't know if there is such a thing. But
I've never experienced that in hundreds of playtests.
Like you said, that overall the point scoring is the same for every card, but if you take a subset of those, that breaks that. So it could be that I'm in a Peppers game and I don't know it till the end. I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm just wondering what you thought about it.
Right.
Like
James has 6 peppers and there's no scorecards that score on peppers.
Well, in the instance where you do take out X number of each veggie, the way that the cards are balanced is that the cabbage cards have carrot scoring generally, so they're kind of in this loop of across. If you think of it like Magic the Gathering, kind of the circle of how these things sort of interact. That's the sort of core of how they're all balanced. So if you've got an equal number of veggies in the deck, you'll have an equal number of scoring opportunities for all of the veggies, and so they aren't randomly assigned.
It's not entirely true. Like if all the cabbage cards, if you got all those cabbage cards that on the back have negative point values for other things, and you didn't also get an equal amount from another one that counterbalances it. You know what I mean? Like, but in the other one, you got all the score for complete sets, right? It's possible that the things you get out of it could be different based on which ones you happen to draw out of it. Because
I don't think that's necessarily bad though. It's just a surprise, right? So,
what's something about the game you wish you could improve?
I think the thing that's most challenging is the market volatility of power player count. It's 108 cards up to 6 players, so from a manufacturing perspective, that's a really nice, I think, ability to play that player range in a small package. I'd really like to keep it at that. You'll get less volatility if you just said, no, this really is just for 2 to 4. The 6-player game is...
Can you define what you're talking about with volatility?
Oh, sure. So based on the fact that you can't plan from turn to turn, there are 6 or 5 people playing before your next turn. There's a lot of things that happen in the market. If there's a point card out there that you might want, there's almost no chance it'll be there when you get to your next turn. So your decision-making point is based on basically like the turn or maybe the turn before you, kind of watching it come around the table. One thing that we've tried is adding another column. So playing with 4 columns. That way you just inherently have more out there.
I didn't play with 6, but I still felt like my behavior was entirely reactive. I wasn't trying to look a whole round ahead.
Yeah. And that's, I think, I guess, bottom line to answer that question is that if for some players that's a concern. And so I guess I wish that I could think about a way that maybe there's a small solution to that. For some players, being tactical or reactive is just fine in a short kind of game like that. Here's my situation. Great. There's something I need. I'll grab that. So, yeah.
I am curious about that because you mentioned having tested that in previous games that I've worked on. We've had that whole question of scaling. How did that go in increasing your number of columns for a larger number of players? Was it generally okay, but you just liked it tighter, or?
It was generally okay. We felt like having the option of 8 veggie types out there instead of 6 just meant that you almost always could get what you needed. Because you actually have 12 opportunities if you want to take a card and immediately flip it. There's almost no time where you can't get what you want, and having that scarcity felt much stronger. So the more cards you start to put into the market, the less interesting the decision points are, because you're like, oh, I'm going after tomatoes and I'll just always get tomatoes, so great. One thing that's really interesting is that a 2-player game only has 6 of each veggie type, whereas a 6-player game has 18. So if you start to, a 6-player game can have really high scores because there is the opportunity for someone to get like 12 of something, but it also means that everyone else can have that same opportunity. So it still scales, it's still always fair, but it is a really interesting way that the game changes because just the sheer number that are in there. 2 players, you might be competing over 6 of each veggie type, but then you might be going after 3 and I might be going after 3. So we have this big range of things we can get. In a 6-player game, you could say, I'm just honing in on cabbage and nobody else touched it and I just got a whole bunch of points. But I think that's really interesting and exciting, the way that plays out.
So one last question on replay value.
Yeah.
When I play a game and I walk away, I like to feel like, oh, here's what I can do better the next game.
Sure.
What do you think people walk away with, like, as their typical best strategy?
I think people start to understand the player interaction on a different level. They start to understand it probably wasn't a good idea to go after this type of card when other people were also doing that, and you start to understand how to read the table. So I think that's the biggest kind of step in sort of learning the game. It's also what makes it, we're really excited about it because we blind play tested with a lot of families. We'll like give it to somebody to take to the cottage for the weekend, and it really hits the like 8 to 12-year-old range. A lot of kids are getting really compelled by the math behind it and like figuring out like, oh, wait a minute, I want to play that again. And parents can play it with them and play as competitively or whatever as you want, but it does have that really strong kind of family game because it is a game that you kind of learn the curve of it, and it is very mathy. I mean, it's a sort of efficiency math kind of set collection puzzle, so that's been, I think that's the thing you walk away from it, is saying like, I need to watch what everybody else is doing to start to understand what my best opportunities are.
Do you feel the complexity level of the endgame scoring, which is pretty damn complex, is appropriate for 8-year-olds?
I think it's sort of cumbersome, and doing a score pad is also not that helpful because it's really just adding up a bunch of 108 different types of adding them. As a game for kids and families, it gets people to learn to do kind of mental math, or I don't know if that's a cop-out, but people have actually said it's actually cool at the end of the game we say, okay, now count them up, so that, I don't know how valid that is, but yes, it's overwhelming for most people, and we usually say, get out your phone calculators to add up your points if you need to, but it's it's a mental math exercise of saying, okay, this one's 15, this one's also 15, so I'm at 30, then it goes up to 100, so there's a lot of adding.
I will say I don't think that's a cop-out coming from a company that does a lot of family and children's based games. Playtesters often remark on, like, I like that we have to do some math at the end. So
Sure.
Cool. All right. Move on to our
Thank you.
final.
Yeah, let's bring somebody new in here.
Yeah.
New blood.